The promise I made to my brother before he died has been a weight on my soul. Take care of her, John. I never forgot it, never stopped thinking about it, until a midnight call woke me from my life. Lucy, my 5-year-old niece, whispered through sobs that she was hungry and alone. I raced to my brother's old house. I found my niece, not in a warm room, but huddled on a cold floor, surrounded by empty bottles and trash. Her breath was shallow, her body frail. I had promised to protect her, but how can you protect a child when the person destroying her is her own mother? How do you keep a promise to the dead when you have to fight the living to save a little girl's soul? I'm John Hale, Major, United States Marine Corps, retired. Now, in the civilian world, I'm just John, a man living alone in a Spartan apartment, and orderliness meant only to hide one truth. I was completely lost. Every day I maintained a strict discipline, but discipline couldn't erase the ghosts, or my brother's last words. A final order I could never report as complete, until that night. 0:43. The phone shrieked, tearing through the silence. I don't usually answer at this hour, but when I saw the name, I didn't hesitate. On the other end of the line was a whisper, so faint it was nearly lost in the static. Uncle John, it's me, Lucy. I sat bolt upright. Lucy Elias's daughter, my 5-year-old niece. The emptiness vanished, replaced by sharp focus. Lucy? What's wrong? Where's your mom? Uncle John, I'm hungry. Mom's gone. I'm all alone. A choked sob came through the line. I'm scared. The line went dead. I didn't waste another second. Everything in the apartment faded. I shoved my folding knife in my pocket, threw on my boots, and tossed a small flashlight and my keys into a pack. There was no time for doubt or fear. This was a mission, and I would complete it. I drove straight to the house Elias had once shown me with such pride, the home he'd built, where my sister-in-law, Jean, now lived alone with Lucy. The house wasn't far. I parked out of sight, observing from a dark corner. The house was a shadow. My eyes scanned the upper windows, a weak point. The front door was locked. The first floor windows, too. But a window on the second floor landing was different. It was slightly ajar. That was my entry point. The climb was easy. I found holds on the brickwork, pulled myself up, and silently slid the window open. I slipped inside, landing on the floor without a sound. The stench hit me immediately. Cheap wine, rotting food, and something sour, decaying. The house was a battlefield. Empty bottles were everywhere. Dirty clothes piled in corners, dishes stacked in the sink so high they threatened to collapse. I called out softly, "Lucy?" A weak moan came from the living room. I followed the sound, my boots crunching on what might have been broken glass. And then I saw her, Lucy, curled up beside the sofa in a thin dress, shivering. Her small, emaciated frame sent a chill down my spine. I knelt and put my hand on her. Lucy, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at me and gave a weak smile. I knew you'd come. I lifted her into my arms, feeling the sharp press of her ribs against my hands. Rage surged, but I compressed it. Anger was now fuel. It kept me sharp, kept me focused. All chaotic emotions settled, leaving only a single thought, as clear and hard as a command etched in stone. My new mission had begun. Objective, Lucy. I took off my jacket and wrapped her in it. Lucy rested her head on my shoulder, her breathing shallow. First thing, water. I glanced at the kitchen, hoping for a clean bottle. There was only booze, dozens of bottles, half empty or drained. I wasn't wasting any more time. The only objective now was to get out of here. Just as I turned toward the front door, I heard a key in the lock. The door swung open. Jean stood there, swaying in a tight black dress. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes were unfocused, glazed over. The smell of expensive perfume, cigarettes, and alcohol hit me like a wave. She looked at me, then at the child in my arms, and her eyes narrowed. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" she shrieked, her voice slurring. "I came for my niece," I said, my voice even. Jean let out a harsh, ugly laugh. "She's fine, just being dramatic." "Put her down." She lunged, trying to grab Lucy. I didn't push, didn't shove. I simply turned, shielding the child with my body. "You have no right," she hissed, sobriety returning in a wave of anger. "She's my daughter. You broke into my house. Are you trying to kidnap her? I'm taking her to the hospital." "She doesn't need a hospital. She needs to sleep," Jean screamed, pointing a finger at my face. "You walk out that door, and I'll call the cops. I'll tell them you assaulted me, that you kidnapped my child." I looked her straight in the eye. "Go ahead. I'll wait." The confidence in her eyes flickered, replaced by a flash of confusion. She hadn't expected me to call her bluff. I walked past her and straight out the door. Her curses and threats echoed behind me, but they were just meaningless noise. In the car on the way to the hospital, Lucy fell asleep in my arms. At the emergency room, I gave the nurse a report, as concise and factual as a mission debrief. They took her in immediately. Doctors and nurses moved around her, hooking up an IV, checking her vitals. I stood to the side, and for the first time that night, I felt completely powerless. I could break into a house, I could face down a drunk, but here, I was just a bystander. A doctor turned to Lucy and asked a simple question. "Does anything hurt, sweetie?" Lucy didn't answer. She just flinched when he reached for her. An almost invisible movement, but I saw it, and that's when I understood. Protecting a body was something I was trained for, but protecting a soul, that was a different kind of battlefield, one where I had no map. The hospital moved with its own efficiency. They gave Lucy fluids, ran tests. Before long, a well-dressed woman who introduced herself as being from Child Protective Services came to see me. She asked a series of procedural questions, taking careful notes. Her tone was devoid of emotion, just a cold professionalism. "We'll have to open an investigation, Major Hale." "Do what you have to do," I replied. That's when I entered a world I didn't understand. A world of procedures, forms, and meetings. There was no clear enemy, no tangible objective, just walls of paperwork and exhausting delays. I filed for emergency custody. I thought it would be simple. A starving child, a drunk mother, a willing uncle. I was wrong. The first hearing took place in a small, stuffy room. Jean sat on the other side, looking like a different person. No tight black dress. No booze on her breath. She wore a conservative blouse, her hair in a neat bun. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy, the perfect performance of a grieving mother. Her lawyer began to speak. His words were slick and full of traps. He spoke of grief over the loss of a husband, of the pressures of single motherhood, of how Jean had made mistakes but was trying to do better. Then he turned his attention to me. "And the uncle," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "A recently retired serviceman, a man trained in an environment of violence. Is such an environment really suitable for a traumatized 5-year-old child, Your Honor?" I sat there, listening as they looked at me like a specimen. I knew they were hitting my weak point. I understood battlefields, but not courtrooms. I knew how to plan an operation, but I didn't know how to persuade a judge. The judge was an older woman who looked tired. She spoke of the importance of keeping the family together, of giving the mother a chance. Finally, the ruling came down. Temporary custody was awarded back to Jean on the condition that she attend parenting classes and submit to random visits from a social worker. I was granted supervised visitation twice a week. I stood up, a heavy feeling in my chest. Defeated. It was the first time I'd lost on a battlefield whose rules I never learned. Jean walked past me in the hallway. She didn't look at me, but I heard her whisper, just loud enough for me to hear. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The anger in my chest turned to ice. Colder. Harder. I had lost a battle. But the war wasn't over. Losing once meant I couldn't keep fighting on instinct. I had to change strategy. I didn't waste time on anger. I shifted to action. I lost because of a lack of information. It was time to fill that gap. New mission, intelligence gathering. First target, Jean's neighborhood. I didn't go during the day. I went at dusk, dressed in normal clothes, walking like a local. I watched the house from a distance, noting the times Jean left and came back. Her car, the men she met with, everything went into a small notebook. I spoke with Mrs. Dorsey, an elderly neighbor. I started by asking about her health, her garden. Slowly, the conversation shifted to Jean. Mrs. Dorsey didn't need much prompting. "That poor child," she said, snipping a dead rose. "I hear her crying all the time. And her mother, dressed to the nines, out all night." I memorized every detail. Times. Dates. More importantly, I found the truth when I went to see Luis, an old buddy from Elias's construction crew. We met in a small dive bar, where no one paid anyone else any mind. "Elias wasn't blind, John," Luis said after downing half his beer. "He knew she had problems. He told me he was saving money. He set up a separate account for Lucy, for survivor benefits if anything happened to him. He even made Jean sign a paper, saying the money was only for the kid." A critical piece of the puzzle snapped into place. "Where are those papers?" I asked. Luis shrugged. "Elias kept everything important in his toolbox. The red one. They gave it to me after the accident. That night, in Luis's garage, we opened Elias's red toolbox. Under layers of wrenches and hammers, in a false bottom, was a file folder. Inside was a copy of the benefits application, bank statements showing the regular deposits, and a document with Jean's sloppy signature, agreeing that all funds were to be used exclusively for Lucy's care and education. And I understood. Jean wasn't fighting for her daughter. She was fighting for the paycheck. Holding that file, I no longer felt like the underdog. I had ammunition. The next battle, I wouldn't be going in empty-handed. My visits with Lucy took place in a sterile room at the social services office. A caseworker sat in the corner, pretending to be busy. Lucy was quiet. She just colored, never looking me in the eye. I knew what Jean had been feeding her. I sat down next to her and gave her a chocolate bar. She glanced at the caseworker before taking it. "Uncle John," she whispered when the caseworker stepped out to take a call. "Mommy said if I go with you, I'll never see her again. I won't let anyone hurt you," was all I said. Lucy looked at me, then pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. It was a crude drawing in crayon. A small stick figure locked inside a black box. Underneath, in shaky letters, it said, "Mommy says I'm bad." I clenched the paper in my fist. Now I had everything. Financial evidence, witness testimony, and this, direct proof of abuse, from the victim herself. My arsenal was full. The second hearing began. This time I was confident. I presented everything systematically, like a mission briefing. The bank statements showing embezzlement, Mrs. Dorsey's testimony, and finally, the drawing. Jean's lawyer stood up, his expression calm. He dismantled everything with ease and cruelty. The financial records? A grieving single mother might not be the best bookkeeper. This isn't fraud, Your Honor. It's an understandable oversight. The neighbor's testimony? An elderly woman who may have a grudge against her neighbor. Can her word be trusted? Or is it just gossip? And when he held up the drawing, he smiled. A victor's smile. And this, he said, holding it up, a child's drawing. Do we have any proof the child drew this herself? Or is it the product of coaching? Of a bitter uncle trying to win a child at any cost? He turned to look at me. A man trained in manipulation and pressure. I sat there, stunned. Everything I had prepared, all the evidence I had gathered, it was useless against someone who knew how to twist the truth. And when Jean's lawyer began to question me, asking about my past, about the places I'd served, about what I'd seen, the anger inside me began to boil. Inside, my mind was cold and analytical. But the words that came out were a chaotic mess of anger and clumsiness. I had made myself into the exact, unstable, violent soldier stereotype they wanted. I sat down completely defeated. The truth, the one thing I believed in, was useless if it wasn't presented, verified, and defended correctly under the law. All my efforts, my strategies, were now worthless. I realized something. This new battlefield, the law, evidence, and how to use them, was a completely different kind of war. And I was at the bottom of it. I sat in the small room looking out at the empty street. My mind was racing. The hearing had crushed me, but it also forced me to admit one thing. I couldn't win this alone. I sold my old pickup truck, gathered all my savings and my severance pay. I needed a different kind of weapon, a professional. Rebecca Martinez was nothing like the lawyers on TV. Her office was small, efficient. She was a woman in her 50s, with streaks of gray in her hair and eyes as sharp as a razor. She listened as I laid everything out, only occasionally making a note in a ledger. I gave her the entire file, bank statements, testimony, and Lucy's drawing. When I finished, she looked at me, not with pity, but with the assessing gaze of a strategist. "Listen to me, Major," she said bluntly. "You have the truth, but in court, the truth isn't enough. Jean's lawyer dismantled your evidence easily. He's not playing fair, and neither will we." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "The plan is we build a case he can't touch," Martinez replied. "We're going to make your evidence undeniable. You provide the intel. I provide the strategy. But there's one condition." She looked me straight in the eye. "From now on, you do exactly as I say. No solo operations. No confrontations. You're the expert on your battlefield, but this one is mine." "Understood?" "Understood," I said, without hesitation. I knew I had to change. The soldier's instinct, fast, direct, decisive, now had to give way to patience and legal strategy. I had to learn to trust Martinez, to follow her lead, to endure temporary setbacks, and to wait for the moment to strike back. Martinez went to work immediately. She hired a private investigator, a former cop, to dig deeper into Jean's finances. She subpoenaed every credit card bill, every shopping receipt. She requested an independent psychological evaluation for Lucy by a leading expert in childhood trauma. My mission was simple: be patient. It was the hardest part. I had to sit tight while Martinez rebuilt our arsenal from the ground up. Every day, I thought about Lucy, still in that house. But I had given my word. I would follow the plan, because this time, we would not fail. On the day of the final hearing, I was no longer anxious. I just felt ready. I trusted Martinez's plan. Jean was there, still trying to play the victim, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. This time, Martinez wasn't rushed. She began slowly, projecting 2 columns of information onto a screen for the entire courtroom to see. On one side were Jean's extravagant expenses. On the other were official reports about Lucy. The day she was hospitalized, notes from her teacher about her dirty clothes. She didn't have to say much. Every expensive purchase Jean made lined up perfectly with a day Lucy was in distress. The picture was brutally clear. Next, she called a child psychologist to the stand. The doctor had spoken with Lucy many times. Martinez handed her the drawing. "Doctor," Martinez asked, "does this drawing have any clinical significance?" "It does," the doctor replied. "It's a classic representation of trauma. It aligns perfectly with what the child described about being locked in a dark space." Lucy's drawing was no longer just a child's scribble. It was evidence. I saw Jean's lawyer start to sweat. Finally, Jean had to take the stand. Martinez asked simple questions. "Mrs. Kane, on March 15th, your daughter was hospitalized. Do you remember what you were doing that evening?" I don't remember clearly," Jean said, her voice trying for pitiful. "I think I was at the hospital with her. I was so frantic." Martinez paused for a second, letting the lie hang in the air. Then she held up a piece of paper. "Then who used your credit card to pay a $250 bill at Le Fleur restaurant at 9 p.m. that night?" "Mrs. Kane." Jean went silent. Her face turned pale. Her performance didn't just crumble, it was obliterated. Martinez asked her final question. "Your daughter says you locked her in a closet. Is that true, Mrs. Kane?" That's when Jean broke. "She's lying!" she screamed, her rage exploding. "He did it. He taught her to say those things. All of you are against me." The courtroom was dead silent. She had convicted herself. The judge didn't need to hear any more. Her voice was firm. She spoke of systematic neglect, financial abuse, and clear evidence of trauma. Then she delivered the verdict. "The court hereby terminates all parental rights of Miss Jean Kane. Full custody is awarded to the child's uncle, Mr. John Hale." I didn't cheer. I just felt a colossal weight lift from my shoulders. The battle in court was over, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Jean was escorted out, screaming and cursing. But no one was listening anymore. Her show was over. A few months later, I heard she went to prison for fraud and child endangerment. I felt nothing. She was no longer a part of my world, or Lucy's. Bringing Lucy to my apartment was a strange feeling. The place was too neat, too quiet. It wasn't a home for a child. I realized military discipline can help you win a war, but it can't help you build a home. My new mission was truly beginning. It had no map, no instructions. The first few weeks were hard. Lucy barely spoke. She'd flinch at loud noises. She hid bread under her pillow, a habit of children who have known hunger. I tried to implement a schedule, thinking stability would help her. Mealtimes, bedtime, playtime. It didn't work. The more I tried to control her environment, the more she withdrew. The turning point came one night. I was woken by a scream from Lucy's room. A nightmare. I went into her room. She was sitting up in bed, trembling, tears streaming down her face. My first instinct was to find a solution. Turn on the light, get her some water. But then, I stopped. I did nothing. I just sat down on the edge of her bed. And as she continued to cry, I did something I wasn't used to doing. I opened my arms and pulled her into a hug. I didn't say anything. I just held her. Lucy buried her face in my chest, and her sobs slowly quieted. I sat like that until she fell asleep again, and that's when I finally understood. Sometimes, what a child needs isn't a plan. It's just a safe place to land. After that night, things started to change. Slowly, but surely, we threw out the rigid schedule. Instead, we did things together. We went grocery shopping. We cooked. I painted her room a bright yellow, the color she chose. We hung her drawings on the refrigerator. One weekend, Lucy pulled my hand and led me to the small patch of dirt behind the apartment. "Uncle John," she said, "let's plant flowers here." And so we did. Together, we worked the soil and planted seeds. I taught her little things, and she taught me how to smile again. I'm John Hale, and this is my most important mission. No end date, no report to file, just showing up every day, trying to be the man she needs. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally home.